Welcome back. The New York City Police Department is dealing with a crisis that, well, keeps getting worse. We're talking about death by suicide. This year alone, 9 NYPD officers have taken their own lives. Our Dominic Carter spoke with the family of one of those officers, as well as with a psychologist who's working with people who need help and support.
He was kind.
It's the devastating visit that no one wants. Eileen Echeverria says she begged the NYPD to take away the guns belonging to her brother.
They came here on a Wednesday night. I was sleeping. My mother woke me up and said, "Eileen, there's detectives here. Did something happen?" I said, "Sit down, Ma." I looked right at the detective and I said, "My brother killed himself, didn't he?" He's like, "Yeah." I said, "I knew that. I warned you. And within 2 days, you gave your guns back. I warned you to get him help. I begged you." This is not the first time I begged them to get him help.
Just last month, Robert Echeverria killed himself at his Queens home, the 9th NYPD officer to take his own life this year.
I'm a type 1 diabetic. I take insulin every day. Do you blame me for that? No. So if you go through a depression, should I blame you? No. It happens.
Eileen Echeverria says her brother's problems came into sharp focus in 2012. She says he had a tumultuous relationship with his wife and had been driven into financial ruin. Echeverria says she had warned the department about him and says his firearms were taken away, but returned a few days later when an NYPD psychologist determined he was not a risk to himself or others. Recently, she says the top NYPD internal affairs commander called her to apologize.
This is not a mistake that you can erase with an eraser. This is somebody's life. My nephew and my niece will never be the same. My mother will never be the same, and nor will I.
Tom Coghlan's career with the NYPD lasted 21 years, starting as an officer and then as an NYPD psychologist from 2010 to 2014, actually doing psychological fitness for duty evaluations. He proudly points out his grandfather was on the job. Today he runs Blue Line Psychological Services. Coghlan says it's time for the NYPD to step aside and let mental health professionals come in and completely operate outside the normal chain of command.
You don't put a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. It might cover the wound. It might make it look like you're applying some kind of first aid, but in fact what you're doing is wholly ineffective. So things that are being done right now are basically Band-Aids on bullet holes. The NYPD is one of the most highly trained agencies in the entire country. If training were the answer, we'd have no suicides. You cannot train your way out of suicides. Training is not the answer. We have people in the NYPD making mental health and wellness decisions who are not mental health professionals. That makes no sense to me.
So why is this happening? Echeverria says it amounts to pressures from everyday life and that quotas don't help. Officers being forced to maintain monthly arrest and ticket writing numbers, or they're punished by superiors. Overtime cut, time off requests denied. For the record, the NYPD says quotas do not exist.
Why do you believe these suicides are happening?
I think that in today's culture, there's so much pressure on them. There's a war on the police, an absolute war that Mayor de Blasio absolutely created, whether he wants to admit it or not. Obviously, the commissioner doesn't have their back. Top brass doesn't have their back. They put a phone number up. They tell me it's working. Really? Did it work for my brother? No, it's not working, and you know it. They're putting a Band-Aid on open heart surgery, and it's not going to work. The psychologists that saw my brother for, 5 minutes, because 2 days later he got his guns, they could have 50 cases, and they have one supervisor watching them. It's not a textbook case. Police officers are different. Any first responder, it's a different kind of pressure.
what we do when we're at work as a police officer, that hasn't changed, right? We're still responding to traumatic calls. We're still doing the same work we were doing for the past 150, 200 years. So the question then begs the question, well, then what has changed, right? Why do we see this uptick? I think the sense of hopelessness has creeped into the NYPD. I think there's a real feeling of hopelessness among the rank and file. We saw suicides prior to the Pantaleo ruling, but I think the Pantaleo ruling is sort of illustrative of what we see in police work in New York City today. This idea that if you take action, you will not be supported, right? And then we see that illustrated and acted out in the water dousing incidents. We've created this culture, we've allowed this culture to be created.
Eileen Echeverria says police officers need real help from the department.
If you're a cop and you call and say, you know what, I need help, they stigmatize you. The next thing you know, you get no overtime. They're figuring out a way to push you out. They're figuring out a way to retire you. I know this for a fact because I have well over 100 emails, text messages, calls, letters from other officers who have asked me, please stand up for us.
Because now officers know that even if they've done nothing wrong, and behaviorally there are no indicators that there's anything problematic, but they go out and ask for help and get put on some kind of a psychiatric aid or pharmaceutical, and the job finds out about it, that they're going to get sent to psychological for an evaluation, and there's a good chance they're going to get placed on restricted duty, and they're going to lose their firearm, they're going to lose their shield. And so here's an officer who's done nothing wrong, but gone out and sought voluntarily help. The department finds out about it because he discloses it on a drug screening, whatever it may be. He gets sent to psych evaluation, loses his gun, loses his shield, and has all these other real-world implications. It's a terrible policy.
When somebody's down and out, they need to embrace that and be able to say, you know what, I need a few days off. Somebody else will be happy to take my overtime. I just need a few days. I need to regroup. You know what? And you know what? I'll even talk to whoever you want me to talk to. In the past year, I didn't really recognize him. It was too much for him, obviously.
In West Islip, Dominic Carter, Files 1 News.
And a reminder, if you find yourself in trouble, reach out to somebody who can help. Make that call. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, governors in our region from both sides of the aisle, they're weighing in on the impeachment battle, but they're not always taking the sides you'd expect. We'll explain right after this.